Miss Natalie Case. A round of applause.
All right.
Hello, everybody. I am Natalie, and I am 54, even though I don't really look it, but that's partially why my hair is green. Because if it wasn't green, it would be gray. I moved into writing as I got into grade school, and you started getting those assignments where you get to write, about your summer vacation, and you have to write about, some short story about whatever. And it wasn't until a little later in life that I discovered that my love of reading would translate really nicely into the fact that I could actually write those things myself. I had some very supportive English teachers who encouraged me. I started writing short stories when I was in my teens, and as a rather poor teen, I used poetry and short stories as Christmas gifts for my family. And so what I did was, throughout the year I wrote, and I collected things into collections, and I would give a different collection to everybody. They'd have a lot of the same material, but everybody got their own specific little stories, their own specific little poems. Now, mind you, as a teenager, my poetry sucked. Like, sucked. It was the worst poetry you've ever read in your life. But it was a learning experience. I was 16 when the primary character for my very first novel that actually didn't suck was born. I was a little short on short stories. It was Christmas Eve, and I just had this image in my head of a medieval insane asylum, and a woman being detained there for reasons that were not necessarily the truth. And that short story became this book, Forever, which is a vampire novel. My main character is a woman who is born a vampire. Her mother was turned when she was pregnant. And it follows her throughout her life. I was at a writers and readers conference specifically designed for women, LGBT, and non-binary voices in speculative fiction. So fantasy, sci-fi, urban fantasy, magical realism, horror, all of those places. I couldn't tell you what the panel was on that I was in at the time, but as I'm sitting there listening to the people speak, this popped into my head. My earliest memories are of blood, the hot, sticky taste of it on my tongue, the strange copper scent of it suffocating me. I had no context for these things. I knew that I was small, and I knew that the stain of it was on my soul. But like so much of my life before I was 10, I could only guess. Over the rest of the weekend, the entire first chapter spilled out of me at a pace that I had never known before. I was writing anytime I wasn't actively involved in something like shoving food in my face. And I wasn't really sure where I was going to go, especially because I was already like 3/4 of the way through a completely different novel that I was working on. However, this one kind of took over my life. And what I knew right from the get-go was this character, her life's memory begins at the age of 10 years old, when she is found outside of a police station with no memory of her life before, with her name written on a piece of paper in a backpack, along with a little worn-out stuffed dog and a couple of changes of clothing. I knew that I wanted to include characters who were a part of the LGBTQ community, same as I am. I knew that I wanted to play with mythology and religion, and I wanted to play with language. Language is one of my big loves, big surprise, that's why I'm a writer, right? But one of the things I love to do when I'm writing, especially when I'm writing a fantasy or urban fantasy, is to root the language I'm going to play with in an actual language and then modify it. And in particular in this, I played with Greek in this first book. I developed rules for how I would change the Greek words so that there was a consistency there. But all of the spell work, all of the magic that happens is done in this quasi-Greek. I knew I wanted to play with some interesting characters, and I'm going to introduce you to one of them now. Her name is Mary, and she's one of those relatives that Thana doesn't know, Thana being our main character. She's a great aunt that Thana has never met because she was part of her life before that 10 years of age when her memory got taken away from her. So at this point in the book, Thana's been transferred to out of El Paso, Texas, into a place here in San Francisco, and she's about halfway there. She's in Los Angeles. I planned on ordering pizza and getting a good night's sleep so I could head out fresh in the morning. It was 6.5 hours to the corporate housing place, and I wanted to get there with enough time to check in with my new boss. 2 bites in, there was a knock on my door. I muted the TV, which I'd set to a news station, and went to the door. I looked through the peephole, squinting at the old woman on the other side. "Girl, stop eyeballing me and open this door," the woman demanded, making me step back. "I don't know you," I responded, frowning at the door. "Of course you don't, but I aim to fix that. Now open this door." I would probably never understand the impulse at that moment to do as she said, but I unlocked the door and opened it. There, in the hotel hallway, was the most unlikely woman I had ever seen. She was old, in her 80s or 90s maybe. I'm a terrible judge of age. Her hair was an array of white with blue, purple, red, and yellow braids that were arranged in a mess of swoops and loops spilling out from under a precariously perched green top hat with yellow tulle exploding out one side. The wrinkles around her eyes seemed to make them sharp somehow. Her nose showed signs that it had been broken at some point in her life. Her emerald green dress was like something from a Victorian painting, and yet didn't seem out of place in the least. She tut-tutted at me and waved her intricately carved cane in my direction before bustling herself over the threshold and into my room. But yeah, thank you guys very much for your attention. I really appreciate it.
Natalie Case.